Hello, it's Julie from Spellbound, and this is another in our series of Love Your Leftovers, to encourage you to use all those bits and bobs you've got left over from other projects. Now today I'm going to be making the Eris Bracelet, which is a wonderful way to bring together slightly larger beads, sort of 4, 6, 8mm beads, that's toned together but don't really thread together, into a lovely design where we're stitching into, through and making pockets for all the beads in this carrier material, which in this case is a knitted tubular wire. I'm going to use 2 colours to tone with my beads. I've got a blue and a green, and I'm going to show you how to do all the technique. I've got some other examples here in other colours. So you can see we've used it lots to do lots of sumptuous beaded designs, and they wear really well. I hope you'll join me. It's a great technique and it's very absorbing. I've got together my materials for my project. I've got 6 to 7 inches, which is 15 to 20 centimetres each, of the wide knitted wire tubing. You see, you can open out the end. This is knitted with 0.1mm wire, and I've got 2 colours. I've got a dark blue and I've got a green. Now this is approximately 8 centimetres wide, and we're going to pop one inside the other, fold it and then stretch it, and that will produce the channels for our beads. I've got some assorted odd beads here, things to tone with my colour choice in the wire. I've got some size 6 seed beads, I've got some 4mm beads, some little drops that are 4x6. I've got things up to about 8mm in diameter, but you can use almost anything as long as it's relatively neat in size. Now, to go with these, I've got some seed beads. I've got size 15s and a few size 10s. I want to keep this design relatively delicate, even though it's a chunky construction. So I'm going for size 15s, but size 10s or 11s would do equally well. I'm going to use a bar and toggle clasp, and each of these has already got 2 oval jump rings attached, because I want to make sure I've got a firm attachment between my bracelet and the end of the wire. And to make the clasp end of the wire, I'm going to be using some 0.5mm soft wire in a colour that contrasts with my knitted wire, and I'm going to need about 1.5 meters to 2 meters just to make sure I've got plenty. In addition to all of that, I've cut myself a piece of paper that's the right length for the wire section on my bracelet, not including the clasp. That means that I know the finished length of my decorated wire needs to be that long. The clasp will add a little bit that will give you the little jangleness on the end of your bracelet. If you want it to be tighter, make it a little tighter. But this is a really good way of making sure that you don't exceed the length that you actually want, because it's quite easy to get excited when you're doing this sort of beading and keep going when you should have stopped 3 or 4 beads back. Right, I'll clear the decks and show you how to prepare the knitted wire. Now, as I said, I've got 2 colours of the wire. I've got this lovely green colour. I've got a nice indigo blue. Now, I've had a little experiment as to which way round I want them to go, and I've decided that I like it better with the blue inside the green rather than the green inside the blue. Just gives us a nice sort of marine green look with the blue inside the green. So let's just slide it in. Obviously you can do this with 2 lengths the same colour, but I think having two colours gives you a more interesting effect, and you get almost like a shimmer from it. Now I've put one inside the other, and I just want to get them neat, so I've kept the folds on each edge, and I want the ends to be relatively even because we're going to do some folding. There we go. So you can see now I've got almost like a shimmery effect with one inside the other. Now my first fold is going to be to bring one long edge to the other and fold. I'm now going to fold one edge to the outside of the first fold, and if anything I'm going to make it just overlap it slightly because this is going to be the edge of the bracelet and I need it to be nice and firm, so I need it to be ever so slightly proud rather than ever so slightly short, and turn over and do the other. There we go. Now if I open that out, you can see I've got two long pockets. Now those are going to take the beads, but at the moment everything is far too chunky and too flimsy. So in order to bring the diameter of this down and to make it more substantial, I'm going to stretch the wire. I'm going to hold it firm at one end to make sure that the two pieces of wire can't move against one another, and just stretch. I'm just running my thumb down the middle, and you can see it's gone down in diameter, and you can see how the weave has tightened up a little bit. Let's do a little bit more, and you gain about 15 to 20% on the length doing this. Give it a good tug, and let's have a look. We've got 1, 2, 3 pockets still, sorry, 2 pockets still, but now it's much narrower. I'm going to just make sure that everything is nice and smooth. And before we start adding beads, we're going to tidy up one of the ends. So I've got a nice firm anchor at one end. I'm going to trim off these raggedy bits, and I really should be doing this over the bin because it makes lots and lots of tiny bits of cut knitting you can see here, and that's what's happened on my mat here. It shakes off, but it does make a little bit of a mess. Okay, let's just knock off any extra bits. Now I'm going to bind the end of this and add a loop at the same time. The loop will be what we add the clasp with. So I've got my 0.5mm wire and a short distance in from the end, so that's around about 10 centimetres. I'm going to hold my round nose pliers and just wind the wire around it to make a little loop. I'm going to twist that loop at the base to make sure it's held in place. Right, now I'm going to fold the end of the knitted wire over like that, make it nice and neat, firm fold. Now I need to get that loop into the middle of this fold here, and the best way I've found is to poke it through the wire itself, the knitted wire. So that's the long end, and that's it through. So I'm right on the apex of that fold. I'm pulling through until I get to the short end, and similar place straight through. and the loop should sit just proud like that. Now the short end I can trim off just inside here. And I'm just going to compress this a little bit to make it easier to bind. You can see how sculptural and easy it is to manipulate. Right, here's my long end of wire. And I need to bind over the raw ends and come up to about here to make sure everything's firm. Now, those are quite long at the moment, so I'm just going to trim it back a little bit more. And then I'm going to start to bind. Go. That's nice and neat. Then to finish off, I'm going to see if I can thread the wire end through the knitting. And I'll try and go back the other way. There it is. So it's a bit like sewing the ending of your beading thread. There we go. And trim that off. We've got a nice, neat end. And later on I'll come and put a few seed beads around here and over these last few vestiges of the raw end to make sure that it's all nice and neat. Okay, bring my piece of paper in. Let's open out these pockets. And by running my fingers down them I can just make the bottom a little bit more curved. Sorry if the camera's wobbling a bit, it's I'm pressing down on the table. And you can see I've got 2 parallel channels for my beads. Let's bring the beads back into view. And I can start to think about pinching off some pockets. So I think I could potentially pinch a pocket there, and then another one there, and then perhaps a long one there. Let's have a little experiment with a few beads. So that one and that one. Yeah, I can see potentially that's going to work. So I'm going to have a little play. I'll come back to you when I'm ready to start adding in my beads. So I had a little play with the wire, and the edges of the fold are quite sharp, so I've opened them out a little bit just by coming underneath and opening them out, so they're not firm ridges but a little softer, and I've just pinched them a little bit to give them a little bit of form, and that's going to help to create a few more of the pockets more naturally. So you can see that it's a softer edge now rather than the firm edge of the folds. However, I've still got one channel running along the top and one running along the bottom. And I'm just going to fold the edge over a little bit on that one. I've had a little play and I've come up with the first sequence for my first section of the pocket. Now the pockets tend to be pod shaped, so they're narrower at the ends than they are in the middle, so it's a good idea to have a size 6 seed bead or a smaller bead either end of a longer sequence that's got a large bead in the middle. Take those off the needle and show you I've joined a double thread, so that's double thickness of beading thread on a standard needle onto the wire with a back stitch. I'm now going to come out into the end of the pod and I'm going to thread my beads on. Now I'm using a little drop here, and the idea is that the drop, instead of sitting like that, will come and just look like a little bubble. Let's get everything in the right place, and you can see that's going to be my first little section of the bracelet. So I'm going to sew through one side, move along slightly and bring it back to the centre. I just need to secure it with a few stitches. There we go. Now I could just go along one edge and then come back and do the other edge, but the problem with that is it tends to get very regular and very pinched in a regular pattern. So what I'm going to do is come back and create a couple of smaller pods coming this way. So I'm going to stitch the end of the second pod and go straight through everything. This is very relaxing. It's just, the stitches don't have to be particularly neat because they disappear inside the weave of the wire. If you don't keep catching your piece of paper that you've got to measure your wrist, it's even more relaxing. Right, let's open up that pod. I'd quite like to create two smaller ones here, so let's come up into the middle of the pod and add, I think, just a crystal bead in the first one. So that's just peeking out. I'm going to sew across to the central section just to pinch those two bits together and seal that in its own little sleeping bag. And then we've got a little section on the end. I'm going to put something else in. When you're doing this sort of thing, you really need to have a tidy desk, not like me where I've got 6 projects on the go that the thread catches round all the time. I'm sure you all have very tidy desks. There we go. And let's just put, I think, a couple of, shall we see if that drop will fit? That fits quite nicely. So, or do we just want some seed beads? This is what it's, oh, I think that, yes. Okay. I seem fated with this video today because there's no helicopter going over. I've already had to wait for a tractor that got stuck outside, so I apologise for the extraneous noise. There we go, that's our first few pods done. The thing with this type of technique is less is more, so don't be lulled into putting too much in in the little pockets. You don't want as much as you think. Let's do the next section. And I'm going to just flatten these sides again a little bit and the central one, just to make them a bit more wrinkly, and that makes it all a little bit more exciting to put the beads inside. I had thought about putting that one in, or perhaps that one. I think that one's a bit dark, so let's have a little look at a blue one, a turquoise one. That's a bit boring, so let's go with, yeah, why not? That'll do. And put a little seed bead on the end. As you can see, it's very unstructured, but that's the fun of it. Sorry, I'm going to move a bracelet out of the way over there because I keep catching it. Now that one has sunk a little bit, so I'm going to just play with that wire in the middle, make it less dominant. Let's come back through the beads. Because it's a long, thin stitch, I want it to be nice and firm. I'll move across the other side and just do a pod with perhaps one bead in. Or the green, definitely. Don't be afraid to manipulate the wire. It's not going to break, and it's infinitely recoverable. If it goes a bit wonky, you can just squash the wonkiness out again. Yeah, I like that, the way that one nestles in there. Let's come back through these. And this is a bit loose here, so I'm going to take a stitch just to hold it in place. I'm going to come a little bit higher up the wire so that my beads appear to lift up, and it's not actually the beads lifting up, it's the wire being pushed down. Right. Secure the end of this little pod. And I'm just going really where the needle takes me. So let's restitch this end, make sure it's nice and tidy and firm. And you can see I'm making progress. Now I'm going to put something in over here, perhaps a darker one, or I'll go back to that green one. And I'm going to progress along, making little pods on either side until I get to the length I want for my bracelet. I'll be back to you when I've done a bit more. So I've been going along adding in my beads into the pods, and I've done quite well, but I'm coming up towards the end, because if I lay this against my piece of paper, you can see that that's the length I want the finished work to be, and I'm within a few centimetres of the end, and I need to allow enough to fold over at the end. So I've trimmed the ends up nice and neat. I'm going to put this end of the bracelet on to match that end, and then I'll complete the last few pods, because it's so much easier to wrap when you're not bang up against the end of one of these pods. So I'm going to make the end of this end of the bracelet exactly the same way as I made that end. I've already prepared a little loop in some 0.5mm wire. I'm going to fold over, push this through the fold and bind it. When I've got that little bit bound, I'll be back to you. So as you can see, I've bound this end of the bracelet to match the first end, and I've opened up the last two little pockets. So I'm going to pop some beads into there using the double thread, and then I'm going to join a single thread on to do a little bit of addition of small seed beads. So once I've got my single thread attached, I'll be back to you to show the embroidery stage. So I finished off those two pods there, made sure everything was firm, and I finished off the double thread nice and firmly into the wire with a double stitch. Before I add my seed beads, I'm just going to manipulate the wire a little bit, just to flatten everything out a bit, push the beads forward, because that's what we want to see. We want the wire to be framing the beads, not swamping the beads. So just sort of push everything down so the thickness of the whole length is more wearable. You can see I can then turn that bead sideways, which is much more effective. Right, so that's given me more of a organic look to it. Now I just need to check I'm still on the right length, which I am, because all this manipulation can make it shrink if you're not careful. And then I've added on a single thread. Now the single thread is going to add some seed beads just to meander down to bring everything together. And I've started already. I'll put a single row around this end just to conceal any tiny little bits of wire that might be left over from folding the knitted wire over. There weren't any. I just think it finishes it off nicely. And then I'm just coming down with a sort of random running stitch come over sewing, just to bring a little meandering line of seed beads along. So it's any which way you want. This particular stitch I made a bit long, so I'm just catching it down with the thread before I start off again. And let's go into here. Then off across this way. There's no right or wrong. It's just enhancing what you've already done. Let's go back through these. So no rules. I'm going to go through that bead. I'm just going to continue going down with some little random stitches to help to bring everything together. Just gives it a slightly more organic, almost crusty look. So certainly with these, the colours I've chosen, I've got a sort of undersea theme, and I'm thinking of sort of crustaceans, as in crusty crustaceans. So I'm going to continue with this. I'll get to the end and I'll show you how I've got on. So here you see my finished Eris bracelet slotted in amongst other samples of the same technique. Now here you can see just one thickness of wire. The knitted wire has been used and pulled out, and that gives a narrower profile, and it's also supporting lots of bigger beads. This is two thicknesses put together but pulled out longer, and again with bigger beads in. And this one here is the original. This was made by Christine, and you can see we've got the same technique for the majority of the bracelet that goes around the wrist, but at the end she's opened out the two ends of the wire, stretched them, folded them back and hemmed them with little seed beads, and you can see she's got this really delicate edge, and the clasp just attaches to the back, and that's a really original piece of work to wear. Now, these are great fun to do. I have been completely quiet while I've been doing my embroidery bits, which is quite unusual for me, and I've really enjoyed making it. I hope you'll give it a go. The wire is relatively freely available, or of course you could use something like an organza ribbon, but the wire does give you a nice structure to stitch through. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time where I make a strata bracelet.